This morning on BRN, death taxes threaten farm families. Joining me now to discuss this and a lot more, Samantha Ayoub is an economist with the Farm Bureau. Samantha, great to see you. Thanks for joining us on the program this morning.
Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about the TCJA permanence in a second, but I want to just ask you, I know over the last several years, there's been a lot of consolidation among family farms. How are our family farms in America doing?
It is a really hard time for farms and specifically family farms right now. Just in general, 98% of farms in America are owned by families. So, by and large, these are, the average family around America providing the food, fiber, and fuel that Americans and the global citizens provide every day. We're seeing, really low crop prices, increasing production expenses as we see, the average American being hit by inflation. That applies to farmers too. So that causes farm closures, farm bankruptcies, the consolidation of farm land. We've lost 140,000 farms in 5 years, an additional 20,000 since. It is a really hard time right now to be a farmer and rancher in America.
Yeah, certainly, and I'm a small business owner. They're smaller business owners. Definitely, my heart goes out to those business owners. Now let's shift gears. Let's talk about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which was passed during the first Trump administration. There's a lot of conversation around making the bill permanent. We don't want to wade into the politics of all this. We know that something's going to come out on the end. But why is the TCJA permanence important to some of those family farmers you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, 98% of farms are family owned, and that also corresponds to the fact that about 98% of farms and ranches in America are pass-through entities. And so that means that all of their farm income obviously is not taxed as a corporate business, it's taxed in their individual income. And so when we're talking about TCJA and the permanence, most of the tax cuts for corporations that occurred in the original 2017 debate were made permanent. It's that individual side of the tax code that affects wage earners like me and our farmer and ranchers that operate pass-through businesses that are facing that tax cliff at the end of the year when this expires. And so when we're looking at, extension of estate taxes, individual tax rates, the qualified business income deduction, all of those are the provisions that are expiring at the end of this year that need, whether it's renewal and extension or permanency ideally.
Yeah, and that lack of passage of certain provisions, I guess, Samantha, could be in some ways considered a tax increase because you would have some of those deductions go away. Probably not the best environment for especially for small farmers.
Exactly. There's estimates from USDA that next year, if these were to expire, they'd see almost $10 billion in increased taxes for farmers and ranchers. Obviously, an exorbitant amount. And so, like I said, we're already seeing increased production expenses, lower revenues. That's just, another hit to the pocketbook of farmers and ranchers trying to get through in this down ag economy.
Yeah, and and also let's talk a little bit about succession planning. I mean, you mentioned earlier a lot of these smaller farms are family farms. They've been generational farmers. They've done it for generations. Part of it is passing it through to the next heir. That's why the estate permanent tax permanence. I'm not phrasing it correctly, but that's why it's so important for that succession planning because we don't, to your earlier point at the beginning of the show, we've had such consolidation. We still need our farmers to produce grain and other crops.
Exactly. Like you said, the majority of farms and ranches do get passed down from generation to generation. We might have multiple generations working on the same farm, multiple families, splitting the income between themselves. And so having that plan is extremely important. There's significant barriers to entry in agriculture. Obviously, the price of land, extremely difficult as land prices continue to increase. But that land price is also really important as an asset to farmers and ranchers, especially when we're facing down years like this. But that goes into other struggles when you're thinking about succession planning. That we have this estate tax, and especially when we don't have permanence and what that exemption is going to be from year to year, farmers and ranchers every year are going to have to plan for is my net worth over the lowest possible exemption level? And will my farm get hit by estate taxes, capital gains taxes, when it passes from one generation to the next?
Yeah, and in terms of the actual permanence, I would imagine that the Farm Bureau and other representatives are talking with members of Congress in order to try to ensure that these provisions are kept permanent. I would imagine explaining exactly as you did to our audience and to your audience the importance of the provisions.
Absolutely. And like you said, like it's all audiences, not just those on Capitol Hill, but to the average consumer as well. It's extremely difficult to think of, the estate tax exemption under Tax Cuts and Job Act is $11 million for one individual. That seems like, an outrageous sum of money. It seems like, oh, is this only affecting rich people? The reality of agriculture is that those assets are in illiquid assets. It's in land, it's in machinery. Agriculture is highly technical. And so, we continue to see machinery that gets more expensive, that's needed to produce, crops and livestock on no matter what size of ranch. The Department of Agriculture estimates, all different farms, whether they make $100, $1,000 in revenue, or they make $1 million, would pay estate taxes simply because it's the reality of having a highly capital industry like agriculture.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, until you walk into the footsteps of other people or the shoes of other people, you never really understand exactly what they're facing. And I'm a small business owner, but I'm not a farmer. I have no idea how to farm. It's very foreign to me. But certainly, if you take a few steps in someone else's shoes, you kind of appreciate what it takes to provide the food on the table that that all of us eat, whether it's the beef, the chicken, the pork, the grain. It takes a great effort. In the last few minutes that we have, Samantha, how are farmers doing in reaction to some of the other economic challenges that we're facing? You mentioned the inflation, but what about the potential for tariffs? Is that having an impact on farmers? Is it just one more thing that's kind of loaded up on their shoulders?
Yeah, we could run down the list of, challenges in agriculture right now. Tariffs are, of course, a large one. We hear, for general consumers on the news and especially in agriculture, farmers are at the end of the day both consumers and producers. We import the majority of some fertilizers like potash, and so tariffs would cause increases in prices like that. And then we also, we import food for consumers that our farmers also eat at the end of the day. It also puts us at a disadvantage in the global marketplace when we're talking about, at the end of the day, farmers work on and produce crops that are produced around the world. And so, when you have a tariff on your commodities versus others, it's difficult. So looking forward, also to exploring other market options in new places, whether it's looking at exemptions for products, different ways, to navigate around tariffs and trade barriers. We also look at labor is a big one, also impacting agriculture. We look at, Americans generally don't work in agricultural industries, and plenty of produce, specifically fruits and vegetables, are still largely hand-picked. I know we see these large tractors and think that that's all commodities, but there's still a lot of hand labor that goes on. And so ensuring, a stable labor supply in agriculture is extremely important as we look to the future. And labor costs, of course, also go into play.
And last year, I seem to remember that there was some drought issues. Is that I haven't consulted my almanac, but has that been an issue in 2025 for many farmers around the country?
Yeah, here at American Farm Bureau, we represent farmers in all 50 states and Puerto Rico. And at some point or another, you're likely going to have a farmer or rancher facing some sort of weather event. It's the reality of agriculture that, even when we look at beyond some of these political challenges and the policy challenges, uncertainty is just a reality of farming when it comes to weather and production and yields. And so drought is big. We saw, Hurricane Helene and Milton right back to back on each other last year. We have, pecan orchards, and I'm originally from Georgia, so it hits close to home. Those trees and those crops can take years to become productive when you lose things like that. Also, just rural communities, the infrastructure that comes from that across the board, whether it's droughts, hurricane, too much rain, and floods. Weather's always a concern somewhere around the country. And one thing that's really interesting is, you might have one part of the US in a severe drought and another being flooded. And so it's something here at American Farm Bureau that, we cover the whole span, and there's always some sort of hurdle for our farmers and ranchers.
Yeah, part weather person, part farmer. You got a small business owner, and a lot more. Samantha, thanks so much for joining. It's great to see you, and we look forward to having you back on the program again very soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jeff.
And don't forget to subscribe to our daily newsletter, The Morning Pulse, for all the news in one place. Details, of course, at our website, and your subscription helps support all this great BRN content. We're back again tomorrow for another edition of BRN. Until then, I'm Jeff Snyder. Stay safe, keep on saving, and don't forget, roll with the changes.